Okay, guys, so I want to talk a little bit about algorithms. As we've been learning in Chapter 1 and 2, algorithms are incredibly important to the problem-solving process in computing. So an algorithm is basically a step-by-step procedure to accomplish a task. It's a great tool, whether you're working in computer science or in business, to enable you to do quantitative problem solving. So the way that we represent algorithms is through a set of control structures. Control structures, there's really only three of them. We have sequence, selection, and iteration. And every algorithm has to consist of at least one or a combination of these control structures. We use a technique called pseudocode to represent algorithms. Pseudocode is essentially a programming language without all the gory details. And when we get into C++ later on in the semester, you're going to see that programming languages have an awful lot of details. Okay, so let me talk about each of these. Sequence is essentially a linear set of instructions. It's like a to-do list. We start at the top of the page and we just check it off bullet point by bullet point by bullet point. And we do all of the instructions in order. A second type of control structure is called selection. Okay, with selection we get to choose between different alternatives. A third type of control structure is called iteration or looping. With looping, as the name suggests, we repeat things over and over again. Okay, so let's talk about the first of these control structures, and then in the next video we'll talk about selection, and in the third video we'll talk about iteration. So we said that sequence gives us sort of a top-down structure. It provides instruction execution in a linear order. We have three basic operations in computing. We have input, we have processing, and we have output. And if you look at the hardware of our computer system, you know that we use the keyboard for input, we use typically the screen or the printer for output, and the processing takes place in the CPU. In terms of basic algorithmic pseudocode, we use the word get to represent input. These are the conventions that the author of your textbook uses. We could have just as easily said input, but he uses the keyword get. For output, we use the word print because we're outputting or printing the results of some processing. For computation, we're going to use the keyword set. Okay, so let me show you how it works in the next slide. All right, here's a simple problem. This problem was actually from your PowerPoint slides. And it says, go ahead and compute the area of a rectangle. Okay, now if you think about a rectangle, we're looking at one right now. A rectangle, let me go ahead and draw one. Okay, not terribly well drawn. But a rectangle has a length. I'm going to refer to it as L, and a width that I'm going to refer to as W. Okay. So what do we need to do to determine the area of the rectangle? We need to first of all, and if you look at this first step right here, this is the input step. It says get the length and the width. So that's the first thing. We need to know what the length and the width are. That's an input step. The second step is we want to go ahead and compute the area, and in math class we learned that the area is equal to, you guessed it, the length times the width. So our next step is right here. This is the processing or the computation step. We use the keyword set the area to length times width. Lastly, now that we've computed the area, we need to output it. So we say let's print the area. So that's pretty simple. Let's kind of review. The get statement, getting the length and the width, this is our input step. Okay. The set statement, computing the area, is our processing step. The print step, our last step, is the output. Okay, now let's try one on our own. The problem here is we need to compute the average of three values. We're going to call those values V1, V2, and V3. Okay, so let's give it a shot. What do you think the first thing is that we need to do? Okay, I'm going to switch over to the typewriter. It'll be easier to read this. Okay, so let's see if we can get this thing to allow me to write. Okay, One more time. Okay, here we go. All right, so what do you think we need to start out with, guys? What do we need to get? Let me move this box down here. Yeah, well, we need to get the 3 values. So we'll get val1. Well, that's a little hard to read. Let's call it v1. We need to get v2, and we need to get v3. That's our input step. Now we're going to go ahead and compute the average. All right, so let's create a variable. We're going to call it average. We'll say set the average equal to v1 plus v2 plus v3 divided by 3. So we're going to need some parentheses. So let's stick our parentheses in. Okay, and then indicate that we're dividing by 3. What's the next thing we need to do? Well, we've done the input step, that's the get step. We've done the set step, that's the processing step. Lastly, you probably guessed, we need to output it, so we're going to print the average. That's all there is to it. So that's sequence. Okay, now we'll move on to the next video, which will be all about selection, the conditional control structure. So stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.